Hey, I'm here with Dr.Stevelacy, and we're going to be talking about the Sundance Kid, of the Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid Outlaws, but he's got some information to tell and share about his life that I'd never heard before. And with that, tell us about the Sundance Kid.
Okay. This is Hiram Beebe's grave. Hiram Beebe died June 2nd, 1955. Now there's going to be people saying that Hiram Beebe was not the Sundance Kid. Well, I hate to say it, but Hiram Beebe was the Sundance Kid. Hiram Beebe was originally, in 1918, he changed his name to Hiram Beebe because his common law wife, Gleam Heasley Beebe, he hooked up with her, and he changed his name from George Hanlon, which was another alias that he was using. His original name was Harry Alonzo Longabaugh. And after he came back from South America, and there are people going to say, oh, he died in 1908 in November in South America, but he didn't die in South America. He came back, and it's pretty well documented if you talk to the right people, not by the pretend writers that were back east. Sundance Kid was a fast shooter. He traveled all over the West, but settled back in Utah. He never was in Utah before he went to South America, but he hooked up in Utah after South America because it was where he would occasionally meet with Butch Cassidy, because Butch Cassidy came back from South America, and so did Etta Place. And Etta was from Utah and was a school teacher before she went to South America, and was a school teacher after she came back. Anyway, the Sundance Kid couldn't stay out of trouble. He was always raising a big stink. He organized his own religion, and one of his religions was Ralston cereal. He loved Ralston cereal. He talked about it before he went to South America. In fact, the Pinkerton Detective Agency mentioned that he talked about it, about the merits of Ralston cereal. And it wasn't just Ralston cereal, any Ralston products. Ralston's made flour. Ralston's made additives for soups and cakes and pies and all kinds of stuff. And that's listed in the Pinkerton circulars about the Sundance Kid. And there are people going to say that Hiram Beebe couldn't have been the Sundance Kid because Sundance Kid was 5'9" and 5'10". Well, Sundance Kid was not. Sundance Kid was between 5'7" and 5'7.5". And when Hiram Beebe died, he was 5'3". This Pinkerton Detective Agency talked about that the Sundance Kid was bow-legged and his feet were far apart. And in old age, you can lose your height. Just recently, I had a bone density test, and I lost 1.5 inches. And I was 6'2" when I was 18 years old, and so I've shrunk. And so the Sundance Kid, when you're bow-legged, you shrink quite a bit, and he did shrink quite a bit. And if you look at the famous Fort Worth picture of the 5 people, the 5 outlaws, Butch Cassidy, Sundance Kid, Ben Kilpatrick, Harvey Logan, and Kid Curry, you can see that the Sundance is smaller. And if you see the second to the last known photo of Butch and Sundance in South America, you see Sundance standing next to a mule. He's smaller than the mule. The mule's pretty small. So he was definitely 5'7". When I started doing research, heavy research, now this is my 59th year of doing research on Butch Cassidy, Sundance Kid, Matt Warner, and the Robbers Roost Gang. Remember, there was no Wild Bunch. The Wild Bunch came into existence in 1902, long after the gang had broken up. There was a dime store novelist who came up with the title, and the Pinkertons started using it, and then the newspapers started using it. This was after they had already gone to South America. And it was a happy time when they went to South America. But Sundance, I'm going to surprise a whole bunch of you right now. Sundance did not have VD when they stopped in New York. Everybody said that Sundance went to Dr. Pierce's medical institute because he had VD. He didn't stop there. Sundance was a hermaphrodite, one with both sexes. And he didn't have breasts, but he did have an extra vagina. And you can't go to a country doctor if you have any problems. So he went into Dr. Pierce's medical facility in New York. And they were helping him because he was getting an infection in his uterus. And he went there on a number of occasions, came back from South America and stopped in there. He was most likely sterile. And where would you go? A country doctor is not going to be able to help you. And that was the reason why he went there. He did not have venereal disease. Sundance was one of those that was mean. They said he was shy. I don't think he was shy, because when he was in prison, because he killed Lon T. Larson of Mount Pleasant, a night watchman in Mount Pleasant in 1945. And they sent him to prison. First off, he was on death row for murdering him. And when he got off death row, he went out of his way to get in a confrontation with somebody. And he was mean until they finally cut all of his hair. He had long beard and long hair. And to quiet him down, they all held him down and shaved his beard and his hair off. And that calmed him down until his hair grew out and his beard grew out. And his common law wife, Hiram Beebe, every 2 weeks, she visited every week, but every 2 weeks she would bring him Ralston Purina cereal, because he couldn't get it at the commissary. And he still talked about the merits of Ralston cereal. And I was one of the few people that had an opportunity to talk firsthand to 3 of the prison guards, Twisty Rich, Clarence Cleland, Les Jones, and they filled me in on a lot of the details of him. He never ever claimed he was a Sundance Kid. But they told me on some of the day-to-day activities of what he did. And I also talked to Van Porter, who was a reporter and photographer from the Salt Lake Herald and the Salt Lake Tribune. And he remembered Hiram Beebe writing letters to the Longabaugh family in Cortez, Colorado, and back east. And how he remembered the name was because Longabaugh was not a common name. And Hiram Beebe was a celebrity in the prison because he was the oldest man in the prison. Van Porter, not Van Porter, Ray Howder, the ID man at the prison, who later became Lieutenant Howder of the Salt Lake Police Department. He was the ID man, and he told me lots of material. He's the one that told me that Blame would bring the cereal to the prison because it had to be checked into the prison to make sure that there was no contraband that was brought in. And she told me, he told me that her bringing in all of the things. And when Blame got in an argument with Hiram, she had the argument, left the prison, went out on the front steps of the prison, and died. And they took her body to Larkin Mortuary, and when they were undressing her, they found $6,000 sewed up in her clothes. $6,000 was a lot of money.
That's a lot of money.
And that money was deposited in Hiram's account at the prison. And I'm sure that that's where paid for his funeral costs and his expenses after she had died. Hiram, or the Sundance Kid, there's a famous picture of Sundance and Etta Place together. And that was taken in New York in 1901, and that picture shows Etta having a watch on her lapel, and it was believed that Butch, the records show that Butch Cassidy paid for a watch from Tiffany's, and everyone thinks that that watch was given to Etta Place. Well, that watch was not given to Etta Place. Butch Cassidy had a wife that he had married in 1899, and that watch was for her because she was pregnant with Butch's first child, a boy named Arthur, and Arthur was named after Butch's brother, Arthur, who was killed in a horse race in 1890. And this is all new information about Butch and about Sundance and about Etta Place, because Etta Place was Butch Cassidy's first cousin, and Sundance, brand new information, because all while Sundance was in prison, he corresponded with his cousin, which was the Longabaughs in Cortez, Colorado, because when Sundance left home, he went to live with his cousins. They moved to Durango, Colorado, and then to Cortez, Colorado. And in Cortez, Colorado is where he first met Butch, Matt Warner, and because they all worked for the LC Cattle Company. And LC Cattle Company was run by Mrs. Hattie Brumley Lacy, and she run cattle from Cortez, Dolores, Colorado, and in Recapture, Utah, which is just below Monticello, which later became right near there was Blanding, Utah. And she was one of the first independent ladies in Utah, in San Juan County, to have one of the largest cattle companies in southeastern Utah. Her husband, Isaac Lacy, was murdered in 1880, and she took over the running of the cattle company. And in that cattle company, Dan Parker, Butch's younger brother, and Sundance worked there, Matt Warner worked there, Arthur worked there. They were all known each other right there and had run cattle. And then later Dan Parker worked for the Carlisle Cattle Company in just north of Monticello. And they did not meet in 1896 or 1897 like some pretend historians have come up with. It was in the early days. Later on, Sundance traveled up to Wyoming, and he was not involved in the Telluride bank robbery, because the original Telluride bank robberies were Butch, Tom McCarty, Matt Warner, Dan Parker, and Arthur Parker. Now, there's people going to say that Arthur Parker was not involved, but when I talked to Joyce Warner was Matt Warner's daughter, and she worked on her father's book. And Dan Parker had come right after the Cosmopolitan article came out on her father. Dan Parker came and threatened Matt Warner, if you ever print anything about me or my family, I'll sue you. And Matt Warner was not afraid of Dan Parker. He told about Dan Parker in his book, but he toned down about Arthur, because I'd asked Joyce, I says, did he say anything of who else was in the robbery on the Telluride? And he says Dan Parker was involved, and so was Arthur Parker. Arthur held the horses, because there was 4 people that was involved in the direct robbery. Arthur held the horses. And one of the writers says, well, he couldn't have been because he was living in Telluride at the time. Well, nobody knew who was holding the horses, and he was one of the people that held the horses. And but that was not their first bank robbery. Their first bank robbery was the Moffett bank robbery, where Tom McCarty had produced a bottle. It was either water or some kind of a oil in there, and told him that it was nitroglycerin. And he forced the Mr. Moffett to write out a check for thousands of dollars, and said he was going to blow the bank up or the whole block up if they didn't get some money. And he got thousands of dollars of cash. And when he went out, here was Butch, and here was Dan, Matt, and Arthur. And they kept saying, well, they went this way, he went this way, and he went this way, and had everybody confused. And that was their first bank job that they got away with. And Matt didn't tell about it in his book, and it was the story that Butch repeated when he came back to visit in November 21st, 1939. But Sundance, he traveled around. He ended up in Leeds, Utah, and was able to revisit with Etta Place, because that's where Etta Place ended up visiting, in Leeds, Utah, because Etta had married in 1914 and was living in Leeds, Utah, because she had moved back to Leeds in 1940, and she was living there with her husband. And it was like home week visiting there, and he was only there for about 3 years before he moved on to Spring City and Mount Pleasant area. And that so Etta knew exactly where he was. Etta knew where Butch was, and it was all old home week. Sundance also, before he got in this of killing Lon T. Larson, He was out to the dump. This was in 1945. And the guy that later became sheriff back in the 70s, 1970s, was target practicing out at the dump. And this guy says, was shooting out there, and Hiram says, let me show you how to shoot. And he says, you throw up a can, and Hiram shot that can 6 times before that can fell to the ground. He was that good of a shot.
So that happened when?
1945.
Okay, 1945.
1945. And that sheriff that later became a sheriff of Sanpete County in the 1970s.
He witnessed that.
He witnessed that. He says, I've never seen anyone do something like that. But Hiram was in his 70s at that time, and he was still a good shot. And my involvement was, and how I got it started on all of this, when I was in 4th grade, Utah History Project. I had an interest before then, but the main thing was we had to keep a scrapbook of current events, of history, and we had to write to a county. And I lived in San Juan County. I lived in Blanding, Utah. And I wrote to Carbon County, where I was originally from, Carbon County, Utah. And I was born in Dragerton. And they sent me some brochures, which I still have. And there was a picture of Butch Cassidy and the Robberies Roost Gang. And I cut that out and put it in a scrapbook, and had no idea that it would be a major part of my life. I just knew I liked that picture. And then realized later on, a couple of years ago, that Butch was my cousin. And I got to interview Butch's sister, which would be my cousin. Also, we had her on the radio on 2 different occasions, once in 1975 and once in 1977. We won an award in 1976. It was heard in 5 states, her telling about Butch coming back to visit. And but it's been, it was a fun experience. And then we went out to the old homestead where the family was, and where Butch only lived about a year and a half. Because he went to work for the Marshall Ranch and to the Ryan Ranch. So he never really lived in that restored cabin very long, because they sent him out to work because he could earn money for the family. He was, but anyway, Sundance was always telling about something. He always liked to talk. People said he was very quiet. Some of the pretend writers have said, and some of his family members have said that he was very quiet, but I don't think he was. It depended on who he was talking to. I know that when he was in the prison, he did quite a bit of talking, and he went out of his way to visit with people. I think he was lonely and all. And I think you would have liked him, but you might have got tired of him real quick, because some of the stuff that he was saying, because the people that I talked to, the prison guards that guarded him, said that he could be annoying at times. He was, I would have liked to have met him, but you know, he died June 2nd, 1955. Butch Cassidy died June 2nd, 1956, 1 year later to the day. And a place died July 16th, 1963. You know, you get to thinking, you know, I was alive when all 3 of them were alive. It's hard to believe that it wasn't that long ago that they were still alive.
Yeah. So I gotta ask you. So if you think Hiram Beebe was the Sundance Kid, how do we know Hiram Beebe was a hermaphrodite? How do we know the Sundance Kid was a hermaphrodite? Because that's something that I've never heard before, except from you.
Well, the prison guard, Les Jones, is the first one that told me about it, because he was in charge of part of the time a shower check. And he told me that after Hiram died, they were supposed to send him up to the medical examiner to be checked out, because there's not very many hermaphrodites around. And they were supposed to be studying his body before they buried him. Now, I checked with the state of Utah, and there's no record of him being sent, but that doesn't mean anything if they never kept any records on whether they studied him or not. But he told me that there definitely was a uterus on Hiram Beebe. And if he went to Dr. Pierce's, and if it wasn't for VD, and they said that it may have been for Katera on his throat, or for his leg, for a wound on his leg, which I don't think it was. I think it was because he was getting infection in his uterus.
But you think the Sundance or Butch Cassidy knew about it? You think Get a Place knew about it? You think?
I think they knew about it. And also there was the rumor that Butch wrote this letter of saying that he had the town disease. Well, a lot of pretend writers and pretend historians have said, oh, Butch had STDs or VD himself. Well, you're not going to tell people that you have VD. Even today, even your best friend, you're not going to tell them that you have VD. And he wrote it casually in a letter. What's the first thing that they tell you when you go to South America or to Mexico? What's the first thing they tell you not to do?
Drink the water.
Don't drink the water. And in this letter, it says that he couldn't ride his horse for a few days. Well, the bottom line was he had diarrhea. And in those days, they didn't have toilet paper. And if you have diarrhea and there's no toilet paper, your butt is going to be as red and raw as all get out. You're not going to be able to ride a horse for a few days because it's going to be raw. And the town disease, staying away from the girls is the furthest thing from your mind and everything. You're not going to tell somebody, not even a close friend, if you have VD. But the town disease is either you've ate some bad food or you've drank some bad water. And also, these people that have been passing things around that VD doesn't buy with me. You know, but people have labeled it real quick that he's been having problems with the girls, and the same thing with Sundance. I don't think that Sundance was that way.
So back again to Hiram Beebe, a.k.a. the Sundance Kid, when his wife passed away, there at the steps on the, was there some kind of an estate? I mean, do we know what she had, which would have been his, at her estate or anything when she passed away? Is there any record?
There is no record. There's no record. They just took the $6,000 that was sewed up in the lining of her clothing.
So we don't know what happened to whatever was in their house.
No, because she lived in one rented house to another. They were down in Mount Pleasant, Spring City, And as soon as he was put into the Utah State Prison, she moved up here. You know, but she came once a week to the prison. I don't know if she did any work. No, nothing like that.
Okay. So she was living up here at the time.
She was living at the time, yeah. But when they moved in 1951, 4 days after I was born, they moved all 300 and some odd prisoners from Sugar House to the point of the mountain. Now, I don't know if the bus went there or how she got to the point of the mountain to go to visit him. But she made a visit every week. Ray Howder told me she came like clockwork every week to visit him. And that was after they took him off death row. And he visited with Frank O'Banion, was one of the other guys that was arrested with him, but he was never charged with murder or anything. But she was held as an accomplice for a while. And but he traveled around, and he had a couple of big dogs with him. Frank O'Banion was with him for quite a while too. But you know, that would make you confused. Where do you fit? Do you fit with males or females?
Yeah.
And that would make you mad, you know, and make you decide, well, do I fit on the right side of the law or the wrong side of the law? It's a tricky situation. He also rolled a derelict guy in California. That's the reason why he was in prison in California, have his mug shots.
As who?
As George Hanlon.
Okay.
And then he got run over by a car when he was crossing the street in 1918, before he changed his name to Hiram Beebe, when he hooked up with Glame. And that's the earliest that we know that he changed his name from George Hanlon to Hiram Beebe. But when he came back from South America, he changed his name to George Hanlon. He was out in California visiting with his brother, who was out there. And then he drifted into Utah. He had never been to Robber's Roost before until after South America. He had been over in San Juan County before, San Juan County, Utah, and then San Juan County, Colorado. But he didn't become real close friends with Butch until about 1898, 1899. He may have been involved in the Winnemucca bank robbery. Butch was not. Butch was not involved in the Castlegate mine payroll robbery. Neither was Elzalay. Butch was not involved in the Wilcox train robbery, where they blew the train up. He was not involved in the Tipton bank robbery, where they blew the train up, and that was the reason is because Butch was trying to get amnesty because his wife was pregnant. And he went to Governor Wells, and Governor Wells would never have even considered giving him amnesty had he robbed the Castlegate mine payroll robbery in Utah. He would have never thought about it. And then there's that fake rumor that he turned in a gun, pistol, and a rifle to Sheriff Christensen from Juab County. He never turned in a gun or a rifle. And that pistol that they he supposedly turned in, sold for $175,000 plus auction premium someone paid for. And it's not a real gun. Dixon Larson made it up, and he's dead now. And someone paid a lot of money for nothing.
Wow.
There's no documented gun of Butch Cassidy's. There's no documented guns of Sundance Kid. anywhere.
So I know you're the leading authority on Butch Cassidy, the Sundance Kid, Matt Warner, and you're trying to come out with a new book with a lot more information, but you just not got a publisher yet, huh?
My publisher is still deciding, and I have brand new stuff. I have 10 new pictures of Butch Cassidy after South America, that he had a family. He had a son, 3 daughters, one a stepdaughter, 2 of his own. I have new pictures of Etta Place after South America. She went back to teaching. She's from Utah. And a whole bunch of pictures of the Sundance Kid. And there's going to be, I guarantee on your comments on YouTube, there's going to be a bunch of people say, oh, he wasn't Hiram Beebe, but he was. I talked to the prison guards. I talked to the people in charge. They're all dead now.
Do you think they knew he was the Sundance Kid?
No. No. This is way before anybody ever even cared about who Sundance was. Or even who cared Butch Cassidy was. Nobody really cared until the movie came out. Matt Warner's the one that made them all famous when he talked about him in his book, and it came out in 1940. It was serialized in Cosmopolitan in 1938. Charles Kelly's book came out in 1938, but it took 20 years for him to sell 1,000 copies. And then his book, second edition, came out in 59, and his publisher stole 8 of Matt Warner's important pictures out of his book and put it in his. I've been trying to stop those from being published. And all known photos of Matt Warner are copyrighted. Just because you have a picture of Matt Warner does not mean that you have the right to publish it, or anyone else has the right to publish it without permission. And I see it all the time. These Western magazines have published it over and over again. And there's these documentaries that have used Matt Warner's picture and have never got permission or paid royalty on it to have them run.
And you now hold all them copyrights? Or?
By Warner and Lacy owns the copyrights. So beware. But anyway, it's an interesting subject. And there's so many people that claim that they know what's going on. Sundance was not buried in Duchesne. Henry Long, the families come out and said that Matt Warner shot him in the head and killed him in 1934 or 36, whenever they claim it was. There's no way that Matt Warner went over to Duchesne, because Matt Warner didn't drive. And he couldn't have caught a ride with somebody and said, well, give me a ride to Duchesne, I want to go kill somebody. Just didn't happen. And there's people that said, well, Matt Warner found some gold well, his son found some gold in his garage after Matt Warner died. Well, if that would have happened, Matt Warner's son would have spent it for his wife's family, because they were pretty destitute after Matt Warner died. And that didn't happen. There's a pretend historian that has made all of this stuff up, and there's other pretend historians that have said all kinds of stuff that are not true, that haven't done their homework. I've done 59 years of research, and I get really tired of all of this stuff that they said this happened and this happened. There's one pretend historian that went on the air and came out and said that Butch said this, and Butch said this, and Butch said this, and Sundance said this, and there's no documentation that they did any of this. And they're no more experts than anything, because they didn't talk to any of the original people that knew anything. And it just irritates me that they can come up with all of this stuff and make up stuff.
Huh.
And it's time that people need to set the record straight. Anytime someone comes up with all of this stuff. Also, Butch came back and visited with his family in 1925. He came back more than one time. He came back in 1917 and visited with his family. He also came back in 1924 and visited with his family. He also came back in 1935 and came to his dad's funeral. He came to his brother Dan's funeral. He used to visit with his brother William lots of times. He visited with Dan a number of times before he died. There was just too many documented people that know firsthand, or did know, because they're all dead now, that...
and you got to talk to a lot of
I got to talk to a lot of those people.
You knew
and I know that they didn't make up this stuff.
Yeah.
Because they were trusted, loyal people that would not have made up. But I also know that there's a whole lot of stories that said that Butch danced with my grandmother or my great aunt, and Butch didn't like to dance. He just didn't like to dance. That didn't mean anything. And that he put a $20 gold piece or a $5 gold piece under the plate after he got through eating. That might have happened a half a dozen times. But he wouldn't have done it a whole lot, because that was not the custom, or he wouldn't have had time to do the robberies that he did. Because, money was tight anyway, even though they made a lot of money when they robbed. But anyway, I read hundreds of family histories that told about Butch Cassidy, and some of them are repeats of what somebody else has already told. It ended up being just wives' tales that turned out to be not true. I have, in my new book, I have a ton of pictures that have never been published of other outlaws that people have talked about, but you've never seen their pictures before. Mugshots that are just out of this world, that I had access to, prison records that nobody else ever had access to, that are just out of this world. Family records that are just so cool.
And with that said, Dr. Lacy, man, thank you for sharing your knowledge with us.
Okay.